Thank you. So welcome everyone. We'll be talking about crafting native habitat with us, Sutro Stewards. So my name is Kelly Dodge. I'm the Conservation Program Manager here at Sutro Stewards. I've been with the organization for about almost 5 years now. There's my email on the screen if you want to get in contact with us about anything native plant related or our organization. I'm happy to answer. And this is Paul and Edith Bourbin. They've been our long-term volunteers with us. I think they've worked with us just shy of 9 to 10 years. So they're a wealth of information as well. Before I jump in for the day, I just want to acknowledge that Mount Sutro sits on the traditional lands of the Ramaytush Ohlone and Yalamu. And I just want to pay my respect to elders, both past and present, as we talk about native plants today and the land that we steward. Okay, so who is Sutro Stewards? So we're a fiscally sponsored project of SF Parks Alliance. And we work on the 61 acres of open space that is owned by UCSF, known as Mount Sutro. You can see it here from the inner sunset from Grandview Park. Our mission is to build community, connect people with nature, and protect and enhance Mount Sutro as one of the city's wildest and most beautiful green spaces. We do this by working with volunteers to develop and maintain multi-use trails while conserving habitat for locally native plants and wildlife. So I really like to call out that volunteers are the heart of our work. All the stuff that we get done on Mount Sutro is with the help of thousands and thousands of volunteers over the years. And they are really just the backbone of our organization. So they support our 4 programs. So I'll go through what each of those are just so you can get a little better sense of what the work we do. So our first program is our trails. So this is really the foundation of our organization back in 2006. So our trails program has helped build the 4.6 miles of trails that are out now on the open space. So these are multi-use trails. And then once we were able to gain access into the open space through trails, we were able to expand into our more current programs, which are our nursery program. So we have our in-house nursery on Mount Sutro, where we grow thousands and thousands of native plants every year. And we do this from seed collected on the mountain and other propagation methods. And then we use those plants that we grow in the nursery to support our conservation program. So this is where we go out into the open space with community members and we do hands-on urban restoration. So we remove invasive species by hand. And then during the winter rainy months, like today, we get to plant native plants back into the open space and help support all the wildlife and biodiversity that we find in San Francisco. And then lastly, our newest program is our health and nature program. So this goal of this program is to address nature access disparities within communities and bring nature to the people who can benefit from the most. So we do this through walks and meditation and other nature-based activities. Okay, so that's just a little bit about Sutro Stewards and what we do. So now I get into the fun of it, so the plant stuff. So I've been kind of throwing around some terms around these plants, you know, native plants, invasive plants, but what the heck does all of this mean? So I kind of grouped it into 3 main categories just for the purpose of today, but the first one is ornamentals. So these are plants that are typically grown specifically for their looks. They usually come from other countries or they're specifically bred as cultivars. So sometimes they're not even found naturally in the wild. But like I said, these plants are really grown for their aesthetic purposes, what we like for them. So they haven't really spent thousands and thousands of years of evolving with local wildlife. They're kind of sometimes generally new or designer. So they're kind of outside of this like loop of nature, I like to think of. But I think it's important to call out that if you love your ornamentals, that's totally okay. Even if it's not native, you can still have a relationship with a plant. And I think that's something to celebrate, you know, even if you love a plant and you love wildlife, you know, be excited about that. But I think when thinking of the context of ornamentals in our gardens, we have to be very cautious and intentional and make sure that the ornamentals that we are bringing into our spaces and our gardens and our nurseries, that they're safe for our wildlife, that they're not going to escape and cause harm to our native plants and our wildlands that we have. Okay, the second category is invasive plants and weeds. So invasive plants are what I deal with a lot on a daily basis. So these are plants that come from another country of origin, usually oceans apart, They're typically found growing in the wild as well, but they cause some sort of harm to the area where they have been brought. So this can be caused by a variety of reasons. So first, invasive plants, they grow really quickly and reproduce really rapidly. So they like to spread at rates that our native plants typically don't do. So through this process, as they're spreading and taking over habitat and taking over space and resources, they tend to outcompete our native plants and really push them out and just take up space. So that's kind of one way that invasive plants can cause harm to an ecosystem. They also can cause harm in more human terms. So when plants are becoming rated as invasive, they also can cause economic harm. And this is usually seen in the form of agricultural. So these plants will go into our agricultural fields and make it more costly or difficult for us to grow food. And then on the other hand is weeds. So we typically lovingly refer to our days of removing invasive plants as weeding. So these are plants that anybody can determine a plant as a weed. It's kind of like an undesirable plant in any area. So I have 3 examples here of common invasive plants that are also usually common as weeds. You'll see them popping up all around San Francisco. Maybe you've noticed a couple of these growing in your own backyard. So I'll just kind of quickly highlight each of them. So the first one is our Himalayan blackberry. So you can see it on the left here on the screen. It has really nasty thorns. This one grows all across the Pacific Northwest and really is a big threat to native biodiversity. The second one is Buttercup oxalis, or just commonly referred to oxalis by us. This is another one you will definitely probably have seen in your backyard. And you can see during this spring period, it just pounces up everywhere and really takes over. And then the last one is Ehrharta. So this is a very unique invasive, as it's usually only a common problem in urban areas. It hasn't really caused too much issues down in like more remote areas, but this is an invasive grass that is really a big problem. It takes over a lot of space quickly, and it likes to pop up every couple of months. And then the last category of plants are native plants. So these are my favorite. I'm a little bit biased here. But these plants are plants that are found in the area where they're growing for thousands and thousands of years. So they have a really long ecological calendar of being here. So since they've had a long time growing in the place where they're naturally found, they have co-evolved with local wildlife and sometimes with indigenous populations as well. So one way to illustrate this of how plants can co-evolve with wildlife is through host plants. So a host plant is a plant where a butterfly will only lay its eggs on. So it likes to find that plant and lay its eggs. So if the butterfly can't find that plant, then it won't lay its eggs. So that kind of unique relationship where those two species depend on one another. Additionally, with indigenous people, especially in California, a lot of our plants are fire adapted, and that's because they had years and years and years of indigenous land management and prescribed burns that allowed these plants to really pop up really nicely after all of our fires. These plants are also have evolved to local climate and soil, so they really like our local soils. They're used to the California cycle, of drought and all of this big rain events that we get. And just really kind of playing into this idea of that everything is connected in nature, and native plants are just one little link in the chains. Okay, so that kind of gives you a broad overview of what all these different plant titles, categories mean. So why do we go native? Why are native plants important? So I'll go over kind of the few reasons I can share. I could go into each of these topics for a really, really long time, but I'll just give you a short overview so you can get a little taste, and maybe you can spark more of your own thinking. So the first category is user-friendly. So like I've mentioned, with California native plants being adapted to our drought cycles, they are really used to being in dry periods. So California has had a history of these dry periods and then wet periods, even if just in a calendar year. So these native plants have adapted to survive periods of dry. And they exhibit traits, what I like to call drought avoidant. And drought avoidant kind of means that it's like an intentional act from these plants. So the plants will either lose all their leaves during super dry months or dry periods to conserve energy and conserve water, or they'll even just go underground and completely disappear and hide out in the nice soils until just a little bit of water reappears, and then they're coming back straight to life. So it's, even though, you know, your plant may appear to struggling or lost a lot of vigor, it's just waiting for that right moment where it gets a little water and then it just springs back. Our native plants are also soil adapted, so they thrive in our natural soils. So you don't really have to do too much of soil amendments if you have, you know, your natural soil in the backyard. So I really like to boost, you know, if you live in the Sunset or you've been around the Sunset, you know, backyards are full of sand. So there's a lot of plants that are adapted to grow in these sandy conditions and will actually thrive in the sand instead of trying to, you know, struggling to get something to take. And they're also very low maintenance. So native plants really don't need fertilizers or pesticides or regular watering compared to more water intensive gardens. They can really just hang out. They'll go through their cycles. They like to be heavily pruned, so you can whack it back, and then they'll just be doing their own thing. Okay, and then the second category is like the benefits to nature. So the first one is climate change, kind of a big one. So our native plants are really good at sequestering carbon and taking carbon from the air and storing it back into the ground. And the one way I like to illustrate this is with California native grasses. So, you know, a California native grass could be 3 feet up at the surface of vegetation, and then below the surface, it can have up to 9 feet long roots. So those roots and that above ground vegetation are acting like straws straight to the ground. So they're pulling in carbon and they're just sticking it straight into the soil, versus trees, which store most of their carbon in their above ground vegetation. Grasses are really good at putting it in the ground and keeping it there forever. And we know how important carbon is with climate change. They also filter and capture water and runoff. So California native plants are really great at taking water and putting it back into the ground and allowing this natural water cycle, which is especially important during these, you know, periods where we've gotten a lot of rainfall at a short amount of time. So having that vegetation there really helps capture that water and put it back into the ground versus going straight into the gutter or hopefully not into your house. And then the second kind of sphere is the biodiversity crisis. So right now we're going through our 6th mass extinction worldwide. So we're losing biodiversity at rapid rates. And we've lost a lot of habitat in, you know, our urban settings, especially in cities such as San Francisco or the Bay Area. So utilizing your backyard and that little space that is kind of left still to nature in a way, you can create native plant habitat and create habitat in areas where we've previously lost it, and maybe reestablish some areas for birds to hang out or butterflies to come visit and find the resources that they need. So I really like to say with native plants, you just build it and they will come. So like birds really like to seek out native plants. They have relationships where they like to eat certain berries. As I mentioned with the host plants. So on the screen here, we have a variable checker spot butterfly, and that is sitting on a leaf of its host plant called bee plant. So you can really watch a whole butterfly life cycle just straight from your backyard if you potentially get some visitors who lay some eggs on your native plants. And then also providing habitat through with insects. So a lot of beneficial insects come in when you have native plants, and it kind of acts as like an integrated pest management. So that's why you really don't need to use too many pesticides, because you have beneficial insects eating the ones you don't want, and you also get birds who like to come in and have a little buffet on what's going on in your backyard.
Yes, and also by doing this, you support their genetic evolving. As our climate changes and as the world is changing in general, plants have to evolve with it. The more plants there are, there'll be greater genetic diversity, and therefore they will adapt to climate change, which is coming up quite quickly. Other plants don't do this as well. For instance, orchids a very difficult time adapting, and so they are in great danger of becoming extinct simply because they cannot adapt to the climate and the changes in nature. Now, there are a lot of health benefits to growing native plants, and I'm sure Kelly will talk about that.
Yes, yeah, these are some of my favorite things to talk about. So health benefits, I'll just start off here on the screen. We have Yerba Buena. So this is a native plant, also the namesake of what San Francisco was originally called, Yerba Buena, or Yerba Buena Island, still with us now. So a lot of our native plants are edible, and they also contain a lot of herbalism. So you can grow your native plants, you can make teas from them. Like Yerba Buena is good for digestive issues and relieving pain. So just having, a little bit of a supermarket in your own backyard of locally native teas. And they also provide local beauty. So I think it's something that we should be able to celebrate, plants that are only found here, and you can walk out into your backyard and you can just see that local beauty, and that beauty that, you can't find anywhere else in the world. California is so significant in our biodiversity and our native plants. Some plants here are only ever found here in the state of California. So that's something to celebrate and to be proud of, and to bring into your own space, and kind of create a sense of place and a sense of locality that, if you travel across the world, you're not going to see the same plants that are growing where you were back home.
Okay, where to start? Now, with all living things, whether it's people, animal, plants, or for that matter, bacteria, fungus, the closer that you can mimic how they exist naturally, the better chance of success you're going to have. And there are three ways of deciding which plants will grow well in your garden. And the first one is to try one of everything and see what lives. That's sort of the Darwin method. The other one is to find out what plants you really, really, really love, and then create the environment for it. Some people have greenhouses, and some people create all these special environments for special plants, aquatic environments, and so forth. The other way to do it is to study different plants and see what will live in the environment and with the amount of care you're willing to provide. And that's your greatest chance of success, because you will be able to mimic how they live in nature, and therefore they will respond quite well to your tending care.
Research before you plant.
Yes. Like they say in the Antiques Roadshow, when the guy brings in the rare piece of pre-Columbian art that he paid a whole lot of money for, and then it turns out that was made last month and isn't worth anything, the guy always tells him, read first, buy second, know what you're getting into, and then you'll be able to purchase the plants and be successful and happy with it.
Yeah, it's almost like the measure twice, cut once.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you really want to go out into your backyard and to, kind of see what your conditions are, so you can match the plants to those conditions. So you can go out and kind of spend some time, really just observing and being present, and asking yourself these questions. What sun do you get in your backyard? Is there a super long duration of sun, or is it super short? Do you only kind of get a little sliver? Where are the sunniest spots? Where does your sun hit in your backyard? Where maybe doesn't get any sun? Where is the shadiest spots? And really start to take in that information so you can plant, sun-loving plants in the areas that get the most sun, and maybe some more shade-loving plants where it's a little bit shadier. Second, you want to maybe get your hands a little dirty and get into your soil. So really looking at the composition of the soil. So is it really sandy? Is it clay? Does it stick together? Is it really fluffy and dark? Or is it just feel really barren and dusty? And really start to look into the quality of your soil and what kind of is making up of it. Is it really rocky? Is it fine, silty? And kind of just exploring that a little bit more. And also looking at how it holds moisture. Do you have a backyard that really never dries out no matter how much sun we get, and it's just constantly staying moist? Or does it dry out super quickly? We got a huge rainstorm and the next day it feels like nothing ever happened. So really looking into those qualities of what your soil does for you. And then asking yourself, what kind of life do you want support? Are you really into birding, and do you want to see all different birds visiting your backyard? So maybe you want to plant more shrubs for bird habitat and food and foraging so they can kind of twitter around in the branches. Or do you want more herbs, you know, to get more beneficial insects, or butterflies? Do you want butterflies visiting your backyard and seeing host plants and life cycles such as that? While also providing, you know, herbs are really good for seed, for food for seed for birds. Or do you want like more of a grassland, more low maintenance? Or do you want just like a bunch of beautiful springing flowers, blooming flowers that come up in the spring and turn into, you know, a watercolor of color? So you can kind of go into asking yourself what kind of these kind of questions of like what you're looking for, what you want to craft around you, and like, you know, the life that you want to live in.
Yes, and in other words, there are lots of good books that you can study and learn about the plants, and you can talk to other people who grow them. But also, don't just learn the how, but learn the why, because it's very important to understand what makes this plant work. And then you'll, if anything starts to go wrong, or if something does really well, you'll know why it's doing that, and you'll be able to make yourself a very nice garden and be much more successful with what you're doing.
Awesome. Okay, so, you know, it's a little bit like, oh man, overwhelming. Like, where do I start? How do I even know what kind of native plants I want, or what even is there to choose from? So I'm going to give you 2 resources to really kind of kickstart your plant list, and maybe spur some fun research for the rest of the day while it's a little bit more stormy here in the Bay Area. So the first resource is CalFlora. So this is a database of all California's flora across the state. It's a little bit more, I like to say, scientific or land manager based. So it can be not as user friendly, but it still has like a wealth of information. And then the second one is CalScape. So this is also a database of California native plants. So they focus more specifically on natives. And they have a lot of great questionnaires that you can follow through to go through and create your little plant list for your garden. So I'll just go over a little bit more of these 2 resources. So this is the CalFlora's homepage, and you'll see here on the left in the orange, it says what grows here. So you can click on that, and you are able to drop a pin anywhere on the map, and CalFlora will collect all the data that it has and tell you what kind of plants have grown there in the past. So they'll use past herbarium records as well, and then also current data from people who are going out and observing plants. So you can kind of see here, they group them by life form. So if you want herbs or shrubs or maybe even tree, you can click through all of those lists and it'll tell you the species. And then kind of like how Paul said, you can take that species and research it, and maybe, you know, it will fit into your backyard, and maybe it's a wish list plant. And then the second is CalScape. So this is the Bay Area Garden Planter. So it's like a little bit of an offshoot from CalScape, but you can find it on their homepage. But this is basically a questionnaire you go through, so you can choose your ecoregion, so where you are. For the purpose of this, I chose San Francisco because that's where I am. But you can pick your county, so tailor the plants to your county. And then you can pick your inspiration. So what kind of habitat do you like? So there's 4 choices. I unfortunately couldn't fit them all on my screenshot here, but we got meadow, chaparral, understory, and then there's more of like, I think, a coastal shrub habitat. So for this, I picked a meadow because meadows are beautiful. And then you can see how much shade you get, how much sun, and kind of pick what fits your garden the best. And then there's the garden priorities. So I picked super easy, but if there's any kind of thought consideration you want to be going into your plant list, like if you're really big into birders or you want pollinators, you can pick that as well. So it will shoot out a plant list and also these really nice design kind of mock-ups. So the plant list was too big to fit on a screenshot for ease of viewing for this presentation, but I loved their mock-ups that they said, and they have all the different species where you could plant them together. You know, if one likes a little bit more shade, it can go under a tree, and really just kind of create something that looks quite beautiful. And that is the two resources. So I'll hand it off to Paul and Edith to share their story of how they've brought so many beautiful natives into their backyard.
Yeah, it's been a while. I started out with the good old Sunset Garden book. And that's where I first started learning about plants that I could, easily grow here, or maybe some that wouldn't be so easy, but they always gave you tips.
Yeah.
And a lot of the original planting was, as Paul said, shotgun, you throw it out and see what lives. But I started getting into more of the native plants when Paul was working at an orchid nursery, but next door was a native plant nursery. So he kept coming home telling me all about, oh, they have this, they have that. And, why don't we get this? And, okay, fine, let's see what happens. And at first, it was, like you were saying, look at the yard, at the whole the where you get the most sun, where the sun moves during the day, and sort of figure out, okay, up above we've got this. Well, our backyard goes out flat for a ways away from the house, and then it goes up a fairly steep hill. And after the trees were cut on that hill because they were dying and falling into our yard, we got a lot of sun up there, and it was sort of just bare, actually Earharta land. So we had to pull a lot of that invasive grass, get that out of there.
And blackberries too.
And blackberries. Paul kept pushing the blackberries back with vinegar. You can actually use, non toxic chemicals to kill your weeds if you have a space where you don't want anything else, you don't care about anything else while you're killing the weeds. The vinegar will kill everything. So after you take, it takes a few, 3 treatments?
About 3 or 4 treatments.
Yeah.
Over a period of months to remove all of the unwanted stuff. Our property when we bought it was almost all invasives.
Yeah.
Oxalis, Earharta, blackberries.
You need a machete to
And
get
we
through.
needed the machete practically to get up on our hill. And since our hill was steep, we were always concerned about a landslide or something forcing, or waterfall coming down from it, whatever, causing damage to our property. So we wanted to get a number of plants up there. Still, at the same time, it's a little bit difficult for us to get up on this very steep hill a lot. And so native plants fit in very well because they are adapted to our climate and soil. And at the same time, we didn't have to spend a lot of time taking care of them as much as we would if we planted ornamental plants and roses and things, which we'd have to get up there and prune them more often and give them more special care. And with the native plants, once we put them in the ground and took care of them for about a year, they took care of themselves pretty much. And we've been able to control it and make a very nice and very densely packed area on our hillside so that the hill stays where it is rather than eroding and coming down into our flat part of our garden, or worse, into our house.
Yeah.
So that is one of the reasons we got into them. And we found that if you do it right, you can produce an awfully pretty garden. And they do flower at different times of year. So you have some flowers all during the year. And it's just a much more enjoyable thing. And we've seen an increase in the amount of in species of birds.
And native bees.
Native bees. We found lots of native bees where before we hardly ever saw any. And of course, other plants and other animals come in and come to live with us too, which we think is wonderful because it's a much more even thing. In fact, since we started growing natives, we have many less problems with garden pests like aphids and scale and so forth, because these plants have brought their native predators with them. They are taking care of it and keeping it under control, so we don't have to use any pesticides at all.
Yeah, one thing, if you are a birder, you probably know this, if you'd like to attract birds, one of the best things you can do in your yard is put a bird bath in, because they all come for the water. But then after that, they want to eat something. So, ceanothus, coffeeberry, twinberry, all these lovely shrubs that you can put in an area. And ceanothus grows, it can grow huge, but you can also get cultivars that grow on the ground. They're good ground cover. But they flower twice a year, which is really fun. We have 2 ceanothus plants, Ray Hartman cultivar, way up on the hill, and you just look out the back and you see all this sea of blue. It's just beautiful.
And it hums with bees.
Yeah, right now it sure does. But the birds are also eating pollen.
And they also, when the birds are there, they also come and eat all the insects. So it all works out very nicely. You begin to get more of a feel for real nature rather than the artificiality of that many gardens seem to enhance. We have a much more natural environment, and you feel more at home with it than just an artificially created environment using just ornamentals. And also things like grass take 2 inches of water a week to grow properly. And right now we're getting a lot of water, but most of the time we're not. And so it's really not very efficient to use that kind of landscaping when you can use natives, which will make it much easier and take a lot less water. Anything else, Edith?
No, I just can go through a list of things that we've planted and that do well in our yard. We live near Twin Peaks, so our soil is naturally just clay and rock. So before we planted, we did add a few things to the soil. Oak leaf mold, which I'm not sure if you can get anymore. But that was great because it had all the mycorrhizal fungi incorporated in it. Then we also had, the way we garden is sort of the lazy man's way. We leave the leaves and the mulch and everything, to cover the soil. So that helps hold the moisture for the plants during the drier seasons.
And it breaks down and provides a lot of the humus that our soil needs. In fact, right now you're seeing 3 pictures that Kelly took of bits and pieces of our garden. You can see how the plants are incorporated into it, when certainly not orthodox native plant growers. We do grow other plants too.
Yeah,
but
yes, definitely.
We do incorporate a large number of them, and you can see that they seem to do pretty well.
Yeah, down next to our house, the closer area, which is flat, and it receives more moisture than the hill. We have pink flowering currant and coast aster, iris, fringe cup, which you have the analogous plant, the coral bells, at any garden center you go to. And they have more varied leaves, but they're closely related to the fringe cup. Also, seaside daisy. And the seaside daisy is a really nice ground cover. It can take more sun than the wood strawberry up on our second terrace up the hill. We have wood strawberry under the shade of several trees that are fairly tall. Now the hawthorn, which was there originally when we bought the house, we kept. And it throws a lot of shade on this little terrace area. And the wood strawberry is just going nuts. It loves it up there. Also, yerba buena will grow up there in the shade.
And in the shade of one of our other trees, I have a whole lot of ferns, native ferns, which look very nice and present a very pleasing appearance and keep the ground covered. Anything else?
Also, up on the hill where it's more sunny, dry, and windy. We have a coast live oak up there, and with the coast live oak, we've planted yarrow, and the two are really they're buddies. They just love it together. And there it is on your right hand side of your screen, all that yarrow underneath the young coast live oak, which I don't know how long it'll take to get real big, but maybe my grandchildren will enjoy it.
There are a lot of good native trees that can't be planted
Yeah.
as well if you like tall trees. But
Oh, and toyon. We have a toyon, and
Yeah,
it's
it gets
getting
big.
pretty tall. But that and the yarrow and the buckwheat. Buckwheat will grow very well in an exposed dry area
And you can see the strawberries on your screen on
on the
the
left.
left. They just fill in very nicely this terraced area that we have. And also, if you can get the berries it does produce berries, but you have to compete with the animals.
The
to get them.
squirrels
Squirrels
usually
love them.
get
But they are very tasty. They're tiny little berries compared to the ones you see in the store, but they have all the flavor. Whereas those large ones in the store, the flavor's been kind of diluted out amongst this huge piece of fruit. But the flavors are much more intense and very pleasant.
Mhm. And every now and then, we do have to pick out an Earharta or an oxalis. But if you plant fairly densely with native plants, you're not going to get very many weeds. So it's just occasionally when you're out there puttering around, looking and admiring your iris or whatever, or a columbine, which Kelly found. Hey, it's flowering. I didn't even realize that. But, all of a sudden you'll maybe see an Earharta, just sort of peeking up, especially between the yarrow. They like, unfortunately, to sneak right in to where the ground has been disturbed. The Earharta will seed if there's a seed there. It'll sprout. So really, we don't have very much weeding to do after we've planted the area with natives.
I think that's about it.
Can I get myself unmuted? Thank you. Yeah, I think one thing I love about your backyard is that it is like a collage almost. You can incorporate natives, but still have your orchids that you love, or your special plants that you want to bring in. And it's not just you have to dig out everything just to put in natives, but natives can fit in right next to them, and you can have a little bit of both.
Yeah, you're just adding diversity.
Yep.
Okay, so that is how you can kind of start your plant list, living proof of how it works, and how it can benefit you. So we just encourage everyone to get your native on, and support native plants in nurseries. So the more demand for native plants in nurseries, the more widely available they'll become, the easier they will to acquire. And that just means the more habitat that we're all creating in our backyards for wildlife, and to live side by side with wildlife in a more harmonious way, especially as our planet is changing so quickly in the future and now. Support native plants in nurseries. I know Sloat has a native selection in their stores. And we also are hosting an in-person native plant sale on March 25th from 10 to 2 p.m. at our nursery. So you can visit our website, sutrostewards.org, and find more information on that. But if you want to start, kickstart your planting journey and get a little more natives in your backyard, now is the chance to do so. Calscape is also a really great resource for finding native plant nurseries as well.
This is a good time to plant them too.
Yeah.
With rain.
With the rain.
Totally. All of their soils are moist. And on the screen here is the seaside daisy, that pollinator we're talking about, which are good for ground cover. And then just one more fun way to get involved and maybe push you a little bit more to put some more natives in your backyard. So this is a new organization, Homegrown National Park. And their mission is to capture how much native habitat is in our backyards and how much is on private land. to show how much habitat is available for wildlife. So if you start to switch to natives and you start planting some native plants in your backyard, you can register your land as a homegrown national park, and you can get on the map and help us reach our goal of getting, I think, 20 million acres across the United States of native plantings on private land. So super exciting project. And then, of course, if you want to learn more about native plants, I highly encourage you to come volunteer with us. We have a volunteer program every Wednesday and Thursday morning, and you can come meet me and Paul and Edith on every Wednesday morning. We're doing habitat restoration and nursery work, so you can learn how to propagate native plants. You can take those skills back to your own backyard and, you know, maybe collect seed from plants you're growing and start growing your own. And we can, you know, just share our love of wildlife and the salamanders we find and all of the fun native plant facts, and you can geek out with us and hopefully some sunshine and some dirt. And if you have any questions, here's my email again. Please feel free to reach out to me. I'm really happy to chat about anything with the organization or native plant related. And then that is it. The salamanders are one of our favorite, our yellow-eyed salamander, but I just want to say thanks to everyone for joining us for this talk, and we'll open it up to some questions.
That's great. Thanks so much, all of you. Reminded me the homegrown national park discussion. We had Doug Ptolemy do a session with us, which you can find on the SLOAT website. Doug is a co-founder of the Homegrown National Park, a researcher on the East Coast, and one of the modern day visionaries of how each of us can help to restore native habitat in our own garden, no matter how small. And I encourage you to go look at his webinar. And to remind you that we'll be having a session on soils and a session on gardening for birds, both very relevant to what we're doing here today. And I did a small Wednesday webinar on microclimates, which you might want to look at to help you figure out what microclimates you have in your particular garden. There are lots of good pictures in that one of different settings. Terry asks, this might be for you, Paul, when you use vinegar to kill the weeds, what ratio do you use for dilution, or what percentage of vinegar for
Okay, there's two ways of doing it. One, you can buy the distilled white wine vinegar that you see at Safeway and use that full strength. And I think 5% acidity. And what you do is you just put in the plant sprayer, add a squirt of like Dawn dishwashing liquid or any liquid that's used to wash dishes by hand, not the stuff you put in the dishwasher, and just shake well and spray the plants, especially on a warmer day. And what it will do is it will knock them down quite well, but be careful because it will kill any plant that the vinegar gets onto. So it's not all specific. It's a very broad herbicide. If you want to do it a little more, it's a little more expensive, but what works even more effectively is what they call horticultural vinegar, which you can find in Amazon and other places, and that runs about 30%. And you can dilute that. I guess I diluted about a third with water. I still add a bit of Dawn dishwashing liquid as a spreader sticker, and I shake well, and I spray with that, and it really knocks the plants down. And so, at the same time, it's not harmful as say Roundup would be or something else. You just spray the leaves very well with it. Make sure the leaves are all wet, and it'll take care of itself.
The horticultural vinegar is available at your local nursery or garden center as well. I would point out that the stronger dilutions of vinegar can harm some of the sprayers that people might have, especially if they have metal parts in them. The acidity is quite strong. So I would either use a cheap little hand sprayer or get a sprayer
That's
that
abused.
specifically says it can handle the vinegar. So you
We've
don't,
always use just
Right.
plastic sprayers. And very true, it is corrosive.
let's see, that was the only question that was posted. And I looked at the website, by the way, the Sutro website, and looked at the plants that are going to be available for the plant sale. Looks very exciting, and I encourage everybody to take a look at that and buy a plant or two or three if you can. I assume you have to go pick it up yourself at the nursery,
Yes,
correct?
you don't
Yeah.
have to live.
Yeah. Yeah,
So-
we'll have the nursery open from 10 to 2, so you can just come by, stop by, peruse. You can ask us any questions. I know Paul and Edith will be there helping us, so we can chat with you about what's going to be the best addition to your space.
Terrific idea. Well, thank you again so much. I found this to be fascinating, and I love the idea of restoring areas to their natural glory, and enjoyed reading the website and about the creek that's being restored, and there's just lots of good stuff going on over there. So I'm really glad you came by to talk to us, and encourage everybody, if you've want to send a link to your friends, it'll be up on Tuesday, as a recording, and you can do that. And other than that, we'll hope to see our audience at our next adventure, which will be the soils talk, I believe. And we will sign off for now. Say, see you next time.
Thank you.
All right.